Good morning and welcome everybody to session 3 of our webinar series, Great Minds Think Alike. In this series, we will be digging deeper into the complexities of mining and exploring business below the surface. The reason we created this series is because the mining landscape has changed dramatically over the past few years. There are multiple challenges and trends involving more complexity, efficiency and productivity losses, environmental challenges and safety challenges. There are also opportunities that arise out of those, which involve re-evaluation of methodologies, digitalization, automation, and using new technologies which enable better visibility. Initially, we will gather a big picture overview of current challenges and trends, and thereafter dive deeper into each aspect of the complexities faced by mining companies, along with the approaches and tools to overcome those challenges. With mining industry incurring billions of productivity and efficiency-driven losses annually, it's imperative to consistently reevaluate the methodologies we use if we expect to get different results. In this series, we will explore whether great minds actually do think alike and how great minds become great. Because the value chain is so complex, we have decided to create a separate session for each element in order to really dig deeper. The link to register for further sessions will be available in the chat box shortly. We have everyone muted simply to eradicate background noise, but we do want you to interact and participate. So please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat box, and we will try to answer them all at the end of the session. If we don't get through all of them, we will respond to you separately. Just for better viewing experience, there are 3 dots at the top of your screen above the button that says More. If you click those and then scroll down to full screen, it'll widen the viewing panel. I'm going to hand over to Scott Braden, Divisional Executive at Adapt IT. He has been there for over 2 decades, developing, marketing, selling, implementing, and supporting software solutions for heavy industries. And Scott's particular expertise is in operational risk management, permits to work, energy isolation, shift handovers, and contractor management. Scott, over to you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I apologize again for my voice. Unfortunately, I've been struggling with the flu this week. So if I sound a little bit like Darth Vader or not, I can't put as much enthusiasm into my presentation. Please forgive me. So what I'd like to talk about are some of the trends that we are seeing in control of work in the mining industry specifically. So I'm going to be drawing on some industry research that other organizations have conducted, as well as our own experience of implementing control of work solutions in the mining sector, and some of the trends that we are seeing emerging from that experience. So I'd like to start with this rather spectacular footage of a train wreck. Some of you might be familiar with this particular example, but in 2018, a fully laden iron ore train, which was making its way from the mines in the Pilbara down to Port Hedland, ran out of control. It was laden with 42,000 tons of iron ore, and it traveled 91 kilometers down the track before being derailed by centralized control. At that stage, doing over 140 kilometers an hour. So the accident destroyed 2 locomotives, 245 iron ore cars, and 2 kilometers of track. Needless to say, the financial costs of this particular incident were horrific. The operations were losing something in the region of $55 million a day in lost production as a result of this particular accident. Now, I'm sure that many of us who've been involved in the mining sector will be able to point to similar types of quite spectacular examples of how things have gone so terribly wrong. In this particular instance, mercifully, nobody was injured or killed. But the reason why I think it's such an instructive example when we think about control of work is that this particular incident involved many factors that went wrong. And it was a combination of some equipment failures. There was communication failures. The brakes were applied by a crew working on the rail, were applied to the incorrect train. And there were also operator errors made by the train driver themselves. And I think what this incident really illustrates is the fact that the growing complexity and automation and scale of our mining operations around the world means that any human error gets enormously amplified by such a set of circumstances. And I'd like to look at some of what the industry is actually saying. Now, the Global Mining Guidelines Group conducted workshops earlier this year, and I'd like to just point out a couple of the things that this group was saying about the particular challenges facing the industry. First of all, there's an enormous need to get the basics right. So have we got the correct operational processes in place? Are we managing data correctly? Are we getting people trained up properly for the role that we're expecting them to play? Following on from that, have we properly considered what support people in these operations require? So do we have the right systems and processes for people to manage the amount of data that is required to be effective in such complex operational environments? And the third one that I would just like to highlight is the skills shortage. So as we're aware, we've got a lot of experienced people who are retiring out of the industry, and fewer people who are entering into the mining field. And the barriers to entry are also much higher for people who are wanting to come into the industry, because the technology is that much more complex that they need to master. So this is reflected in what we see from a software perspective in terms of the types of demand. So Verdantix is a research organization that looks at the adoption of operational risk management solutions across multiple industries. And when they were surveying mining executives across the globe in 2021, what they were finding, obviously, in the face of the pandemic, the key concerns were around worker health protection. With 93% of respondents saying that that was their priority for the following 2 years. But very closely following on from that was the need for safe operations, with a strong emphasis on operational excellence initiatives that are going to help them to achieve their safety objectives. And this is really reflected across industries. So when they break the responses down across industries, what we're seeing is that manufacturing, oil and gas, mining, infrastructure, power generation, all of these industries are really looking to invest in these types of operational risk management systems and looking to increase the uptake in their workforces. Just breaking that down a little bit further, when they look at what constitutes operational risk management solutions. There's obviously all of the elements that make up process safety management, incident reporting and management and so forth. But the specific segment that they see growing most strongly in terms of what the customers are adopting is in the control of workspace. So they are, over the next couple of years, seeing a 23% compound annual growth rate anticipated in a
Sorry, Scott, I can't hear you anymore. I'm not sure. There we go.
Sorry, Caroline.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Apologies for that. Okay, so looking at one of the big factors that's driving this, they are also pointing to the fact that industrial firms, not just mining firms, but industrial firms more generally, are facing this issue of high workforce turnover and attrition. So there's a great need to make sure that these organizations are putting in place automated processes and systems that are going to help people in these environments to perform their jobs so much more effectively and safely. Okay, so to summarize then, what industry bodies and what research organizations are pointing to is that mining companies are prioritizing control of work technology. They're doing this because of the tremendous need to minimize risk in their environments. They need to be focusing on technologies that will actually help to prevent incidents from occurring in the first place. It needs to be a proactive technology, something that's not just going to be assessing what happened after the fact, as important as that may be, but they actually want solutions that are working up front to make sure that people are following processes correctly. They're needing to make sure that compliance is improved in these environments. And of course, given the challenges around the workforce, we need to make sure that all of this happens as easily as possible. We need to make it easier for people in these environments to do the right thing. So this is something that we are very familiar with in our business. We've been at this for a good long time now, as Caroline was pointing out earlier on, and we've worked with a very wide range of large organizations around the globe. You'll see with some of the logos at the bottom of the screen there, a lot of these are obviously very familiar to us in the mining industry, but there are also a number of larger organizations that we work with that are outside of the mining industry. Oil and gas, power generation, these are also large industries that face much the same in terms of the challenges that I've been talking through. So our control of work product is called IntelliPermit, and IntelliPermit in a nutshell is about making sure that when maintenance work takes place, that the hazards are correctly identified, the right controls have been identified that are consistent with those, with mitigating the risk that arise from those hazards. We need to make sure that everybody involved in the process is properly trained and competent and authorized for their role. Of course, there's a lot that goes into making sure that energy isolation challenges are properly addressed. Have we got the correct instruction for each scenario to make sure that all sources of energy have been correctly identified and isolated? And finally, do we have proper visibility of all work taking place across the operations to prevent any sort of hazards that arise from work group interactions? So on that point, the type of thing that we do in our software is to look at where there are any kind of overlapping conditions. So if we've got permits that are being applied for in the same work area, for example, well, that's quite obvious. We need to highlight those situations, but there may be other scenarios where work is taking place in areas adjacent to one another where those work groups could impact each other's work. So not work taking place in an area that's adjacent to another work group working with flammable solvents, or work taking place on a level above hot work, for example, and they might be spilling sparks onto a work level below, where there's another work crew trying to perform their work. And then, of course, visually, we provide tools that will allow people to see where their work has been planned and what jobs are going to be taking place around them at any particular point into the future. So I'd like to run through a couple of our clients in a little bit more detail, just to explain perhaps how these capabilities are actually used practically by our customers. So if I start with Newmont, Newmont is obviously one of the world's largest gold producers with operations around the world. And we've been working with them for a decade now. They've seen particular success with the adoption of a tele-permit across their operations. Something to perhaps highlight is the way that the solution helps them to ensure that the way that they manage confined space activities is properly controlled. So, as we know, confined spaces can be incredibly hazardous environments, and so the type of thing that a tele-permit does is to make sure that first of all that confined space is correctly identified, that all of the hazards associated with that particular confined space are properly addressed in the permits to work, and this has been borne out in the types of feedback that they get when they are audited by the likes of the Department of Mines in Western Australia. South 32 is another large organization that we've worked with for many years, both in Africa and in Australia. Some of the elements that I'd like to highlight is the fact that South 32 is a user of SAP, so we integrate IntelliPermit with SAP to make sure that all of the details of the work orders are available in the permit to work system. It means that we can accurately identify the equipment being worked on and therefore the correct isolations that are required. The other thing that's quite interesting on some of the South 32 sites is the integration with access control. So that's obviously addressing situations where people might leave site with isolation locks still hanging on the plant, because that obviously involves invoking quite a complex process if you need to go and cut locks off that are left hanging on equipment on site. And then I think just to highlight the fact that some of these are very large operations from a maintenance perspective. Wesley Alumina, for example, on average, these folks are processing just under 170 permits a day. In each one of those permits, obviously controlling the activities of a whole number of people. So we've certainly got technology that can scale. And then in terms of exotic environments, it doesn't get more exotic than a Newcrest's Lihir mine out in Papua New Guinea. This is a volcanic island only 2 degrees off the equator. And I think what's important to highlight from this particular project was the ability of technology such as IntelliPermit to make sure that the paperwork is handled as effectively and as efficiently as possible. So the time and motion study that they did was showing that they were taking 20 minutes just to complete the paperwork around permits to work. Obviously, also with none of the checks and balances to improve accuracy. So introducing a tool such as IntelliPermit allowed it basically freed up all of that time to make sure that the supervisors were able to focus on what people were actually doing in the field, rather than spending all of this time producing what was often quite low quality permit to work documentation in the offices. BHP is also another large mining operation that we work with around the globe. Again, a range of capabilities that they make use of. Something that has been very successful in this environment is identifying people who are signing the permits using their access cards. We can also obviously use biometric identification for that, but the access card technology worked very well, especially during COVID, as one can imagine. And these sites have also been eager adopters of our mobile technology. So this allows people to apply for permits and sign permits in the field. The other technology that has been broadly adopted is something that Fortescue Metals are doing, and that is using this technology to tag the isolation points in the field using QR codes. So the mobile devices allow you to basically scan that QR code to confirm that you've got the correct isolation tag going onto the correct isolation point in the field. And that is also a technology that is being rapidly adopted within Rio Tinto, especially at their Gudai operation, which is a brand new mine, where they are RFID tagging all of their isolation points in the field, so that you can do that three-way match between the isolation point, the tag going onto that isolation point, and the permit itself. So this is really elevating the type of control that the permit to work system is providing, above merely an administrative control of the risks in the workplace. And you can see that the types of dashboarding that we provide, so that it's very easy to see if you walk into any of their control rooms, the permits that are outstanding at any point in time, and they can be color coded based on status and type and so on and so forth. So just looking at some of the technology trends, I think the first one that we are seeing is that many of our customers are now adopting cloud computing. And obviously this has a huge benefit in your ability to rapidly scale up, to put in place the sorts of servers that you would need to run a solution such as IntelliPermit. But of course, you need to make sure that you've correctly addressed the cybersecurity risks that come with running solutions on the cloud. We've invested heavily in making sure that we are ISO 27001 certified for that reason. But it's something that is a major factor in the implementation of any IT solution these days, is ensuring that the cybersecurity risks are adequately addressed. Secondly, you've heard me talk a little bit about mobility, the fact that we need people in the workplace to have the type of information that they need available at their fingertips, quite literally. We refer to those as connected workers, people who are able to access the information that they need in the field. And what we are seeing is, particularly with newer mining operations, a lot of interest in the ability to do isolation verification in the field using our mobile technology and RFID tags or QR codes on the isolation points. And finally, given the speed with which new entrants into the mining sector are needing to come up to speed, it's important that any technology that we put in front of the users is something that they can adopt very rapidly. So we spend a lot of time obviously looking at the type of user interfaces that we design. We recognize that our technologies are really enablers, that people don't go to work with the goal of producing permits. They go to work with the goal of making sure that the plant is maintained and that work is done safely. So in that context, we're enabling technology. We must be, you know, as invisible as possible in a certain sense. We must get out of the way of people who need to get on with the work that they need to do in the field. But that means providing things such as, you know, permit dashboards. We provide integration with 3D models so that you can very easily see where permits are taking place in relation to other jobs in a complex environment. And integration into GIS is something that we are doing a number of projects on at the moment with a very heavy focus on this because a lot of organizations have also invested heavily in their GIS technologies, and they're wanting to bring those two worlds together so that you can see, particularly on very geographically distributed operations, where all of the activity is taking place. So just a couple of the lessons learned from recent projects, and when I talk about recent projects, I guess I'm talking about the COVID era. And I think all of us can probably reflect on just how much COVID taught us in terms of what can be achieved remotely. So all of the technology work that we do with our customers, really all of the technical elements of that, whereas it can be done remotely. Whereas in the past, you know, I think we spent far too much time ferrying our people across oceans and just to remote sites to go and perform activities which could be done remotely. And I think that those customers themselves recognize that themselves in their own in the way that they conduct business themselves. However, it does mean that you need to pay a lot more attention to change management with the people who are on site. So I think that while so much can be done remotely, it does mean that the quality of the interaction that we have with the people on site when we are looking at the particular challenges that we're facing are critical. And as always, as always been the case, the visibility of senior leadership on these sites is critical as well. So we really need their visible and felt leadership. Otherwise, any sort of project such as adopting control of work is going to be a real challenge. And a level below that is also, you know, recognizing that projects such as these can be fairly complex. They involve stakeholders from many departments across quite complex organizations, and it's critical that we involve the correct people from IT, from environment, health and safety departments, from production, from maintenance, and to get those people on board early in the projects to make sure that we have their inputs and we have their buy-in to what is being what everybody is trying to achieve. And then just to reiterate, cybersecurity risks are very real. They can really derail projects, and they need to be considered at every stage when we're looking at introducing new technology into mining environments. So that's all that I wanted to go through. Thank you very much, guys. I am available for questions. I think I'll stop sharing the presentation, and then you can have my fluey face with any questions that you may have on what I presented.
Thank you, Scott. I find it very encouraging that mines are realizing it's not about just reporting and compliance, but actually being proactive and preventing.
Caroline, I've got a question from Madeline. Madeline, your hand's up, but you're on mute. Oh, she's gone.
No problem. I'll get her back in. Gideon?
Scott, yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting, much appreciated. I'm a trade unionist, and what I find, is often there's a built-in resistance when it comes to new technology. Are you going to use it for more than what you say it's supposed to? Are you going to monitor performance? Will it lead to other kind of actions? But so that's when I pick up normally that sensitivity, around bringing in new technology, although it's such an important element from health and safety point of view. But you did not raise it, but is there because one of the big challenges in battle is illegal mining activities. Is there a way that this kind of technology that you're referring to can also assist in a way that you manage, movement, illegal mining activities, etc., etc.? Because I'm looking at it, and I think you always nowadays have to add something to it, to make it, to sell it. So that's the thing. The first thing is, if it needs to be sold to the workforce, what is the best way to do it? And secondly, obviously, is there a benefit in managing illegal mining activities or movement of illegal miners?
Yeah, Gideon, thanks. I think if I can tackle your first question first, I remember very vividly visiting an underground mine and conducting interviews with some of the people who were maintainers on that mine, and one of them said how his practice was when he was given a permit to work for a job that needed to be conducted underground, that he would obviously be given a copy. The permit was produced in duplicate, one copy being left in the permit issuing office and the other copy to be taken to the work site. And this guy was saying, no, he leaves his copy of the permit with the hoist driver on the shaft, the hoist operator, because he said no, he didn't trust the company. If something happened to him underground, he wanted to make sure that there was evidence above ground in somebody else's hands that the correct procedures, that he had followed the correct processes and had the correct paperwork to do that job. So I think that is something that it is very important to address that with the workforce as a whole, but for people to understand that where safety is concerned, that transparency, to make sure that there's a system of record that doesn't rely on a piece of paper that's floating around, is actually there to protect everybody involved in that situation. So I'm not for a minute saying that it's an easy issue to address, but the fact that you have an independent system of record is something that I think it can be quite useful when addressing this with the broader workforce. As far as illegal mining is concerned, I can't profess to be an expert with all of the challenges involved around illegal mining. I mean, the sort of reporting that we see around this issue is quite hair-raising, obviously. But I do think that the ability for, I mean, one of the obvious concerns is the interaction of your legal workforce with the illegal miners, and I don't see that control of work per se is going to be that helpful in that situation. But I would say that making sure that the communication network that's available is spread as widely as possible and is available throughout the operations. I think that is a technology that can certainly help in those environments, so that if people are running into a situation with illegal miners, that they can at least communicate out as rapidly and as effectively as possible.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to go on and introduce Guy. My apologies.
Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, Guy is CFO and COO at RSPH. He's a co-founder, in fact. But Guy has been very heavily involved in mine safety, along with Scott, for probably over 15 years. He's very hands-on when it comes to mine safety and deals directly with our clients. Their relationships are very important and decades long too. Guy, over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. And thank you, Scott, for your insights into what's going on in the world around us. We hear from you fairly regularly and always, as today. Appreciate that input. I'm going to take a step back and let's have a look at what the world has seen and has taken note of over past years in terms of major mining disasters. And in front of you, you'll see in date order the mine disasters that have occurred since the early 1900s. Now, thank goodness that the really big ones are no longer with us and hopefully will not recur. Things like the Korea coal mine disaster of 1906 with 1,100 people killed. Then the 1942 disaster in China with 1,549 killed. But that's what it took in those days to create news. And South Africa was included in that with the Colebrook disaster of 1960. And we're going to come back a little later on to the Wankie Colliery disaster, which is within memory of quite a few of the participants here today. If you could move on, please, Caroline. However, South Africa itself has had more than just one disaster, unfortunately.
Apologies, I seem to be frozen.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry
okay.
about that.
And if we have to do it this way, that's fine. And what's very interesting about this, there are a couple of repeat offenders in here, and it's fascinating that the first of those, or the top row, if you'll see there, as with all of the major mining disasters around the world, are in coal. But people, coal mines are not the only mines that produce methane gas and highly explosive environments, which was the ultimate cause of all of those disasters. These occur also in the gold industry and in various others as well. You'll see that the most recent of our disasters here was Vaal Reefs in 1995. And since then, the numbers have, thank goodness, shrunk, and long may they continue shrinking. Next, please, Caroline. From a mining perspective, or a mine's corporate perspective, there are huge costs involved with these disasters. And as with an iceberg, the direct costs, that which you can see directly, is the smaller part of the cost. The indirect costs, which are related to but not necessarily visible, are the ones which are really even worse than that. And they also tend to continue running for year after year after year. All the increases in insurance premiums, for example, the impact to your staff morale, insurance premium increases, etc., etc. They carry on for a long time. And they are massive numbers. But who is it that truly feels the cost of any mining disaster? It's the humans, the people who are actually involved, and more specifically, those who are left behind. Now, the mining industry employs over 400,000 people currently. And in 2021, we experienced 78 fatalities. And if you apply the multiplier effect that comes out of development economics, and the multiplier in mining is in the order of 8, then 936 dependents directly felt the loss of that one individual. And in 2022, 38 died, 38 have died so far. And of those, 456 dependents are counting the cost and the damage and disruption to their lives. However, that's not the true economic cost. It's the direct cost, and those are the people who feel it the most. But beyond that, a survey carried out in Swaziland indicated that for every job, there were up to 166 people depending on that revenue stream. So think people like barbers, spaza shop owners, etc., etc. And just have a look at the knock-on effect to an extended community. In 2021, anything up to 12,948 people could have been impacted by those deaths. Currently, up to 6,000 people. That's massive. And people are impacted in many and various different ways. Now, as a teenager, I went to boarding school in Rhodesia. And in June 1972, I recall coming into the prep room at lunchtime one day. And it was an absolute buzz. Very soon picked it up that one of the Wankie Colliery in Rhodesia at that stage had experienced a massive explosion, and that 460 odd people were trapped underground. That didn't really mean an awful lot to us. We were fairly immune at that stage to statistics of death and injuries and such like. But it then came home to us that one of the boarders in our house had a father who was down there. And to see Hilton, as you see in these pictures, a mess of tears, snot, and grief, really brought home to us just what was going on down in that pit in Wankie. It took people above ground 3 days to learn that 426 people had perished in that accident. Mercifully, due to the nature of methane and due to the temperatures that were generated in there, they probably died extremely quickly, unlike various other incidents around the world and many other mining incidents. And this memory, and most of you who have been involved in the mining industry have been involved in helping the families of people who have perished underground. This and these people are the ones who carry the greatest burden of any death underground. And these are the people that we are working to help reduce the incidence of death. This is where IntelliPermit truly comes into its own. And I think when you compare and view the amount of work that Adapt IT and ourselves are doing within the mining industry in South Africa at the moment, you can only hope that we are working towards an even lower death rate than we currently have. 38 deaths to date in 2022 is still 38 too many. We'd like to see all significant mines, all mines, in fact, involved in introducing permits to work and better working practices underground to reduce this to nothing more than zero. Thank you. Caroline, back to you.
Thank you, Guy, for that very sobering and emotional reminder of why we do what we do. It's the human element, ultimately, that is the driver behind all of this. Does anyone else have any questions?
Caroline, it's Dilly. I'd just like to add to Gideon's question to support what Scott had already shared. Gideon, we're glad to have Solidarity, the union, which is very important in the mining sector, as you know. Gideon, we also met last week when you were at the Mining Health and Safety. And if you heard the theme there, it was largely around zero tolerance as far as harm is concerned. And I remember it was a high of about 600 lives per year that was being lost. And the mining sector needs to be applauded in terms of the effort they've put in to reduce it. I agree with Guy that 38 in 9 months this year is far too. But your question was, is this a policing instrument for the mine workers? We can assure you that it's not a policing. It's focused on preventative measures, minimizing the risks. And if we look at what Scott shared with you, were largely the multinational mining company. But if we look closer at home, we take an entity like Eskom, where Rifle Shot together with Adapt IT has been involved with to date, from Koeberg Nuclear Power Station to every power station. There's been hardly any incidents. If we look at what is Lonmin in Marikana, which is Sibanye Stillwaters today, that's being rolled out. And you look at the preventative measures that have been taken place in those platinum mines, we could have had a number of injuries and risks to families that Guy had shared with you. Goes to Tonox and Saldanha Bay. At the moment, we are rolling out around 9 mines and smelters across Amplats, part of Anglo, as well as Glencore. And a lot of these companies are coming to Adapt IT and Rifle Shot not to police at all, but more from a preventative perspective with the focus on saving human lives. So Gideon, I wanted to reassure you with that in terms of the technology that's being used in IntelliPermit. I hope that reassures you, Gideon.
Indeed. No, thanks, Dilly.
There's one other aspect in there, Dilly and Gideon, and that is based upon reports which you can draw from IntelliPermit. We can identify areas where people could possibly need retraining or additional training, possibly where there are setup issues which could be addressed, which would in the long term also help to improve the safety aspect underground and above ground for that matter. So it can, in effect, also be a learning tool if the data is correctly analyzed and used thereafter.
Hi, it's Ian here. Scott, I don't know if you see the question I posted and you want to talk about the logbook functionality. And I'm thinking particularly of Mary Spruit and Jagersfontein, directly under control of a mine. But both of those disasters, in my view, could have been prevented with regular inspections and reporting and escalations. Scott, do you want to talk
yes,
on that?
Sure, Ian. Unfortunately, Ian, I don't have enough detail on everything that went on in those particular incidents to be able to talk with confidence about the specifics of those situations. However, I think that the principles are very well established, that you need to have robust systems of record to make sure that the correct inspections are taking place, that if any inspections are missed, that situation is immediately escalated, and that there's visibility of the fact that any inspections that should have taken place but haven't are missing. So again, going right the way back to what the Global Mining Group was saying, was that there is very much a need to go back to basics to make sure that the very well established processes and procedures to address those sorts of issues proactively are being correctly followed in the workplace. And for that, you need systems that provide accurate record keeping and transparency. So if you have a situation where these records are supposedly being kept, but they're not immediately visible to all the relevant people on the site, then there's a very real danger that the correct inspections are not taking place. As I say, I don't know whether that was a major contributing factor into those particular incidents, but certainly these are very basic principles, very well established in industry, and all too often, unfortunately, what we're finding is that when something goes wrong, it is the basic issues that haven't been addressed.
So maybe just to add to it, the forensic reports on Jagersfontein is not out yet, and actually I'm not allowed to talk about some of it. I'm too close to it. But let's talk about Maryspruit, because they did flag that the slime dams were too full months before, but they kept on pumping. My view is the logbook functionality would have alerted and been able to escalate to top management that Houston,
absolutely.
we have a very big problem.
Absolutely.
And I suspect, and don't quote me on this, it would probably have been very similar to Jagersfontein if you read the press reports.
Yeah.
Scott, would the biometric functionality not help to at least prevent illegal miners walking through the front door?
Yes, so Caroline, that is really an access control issue. And look, biometric technology we've been using in our solutions for more than 15 years now, so the technology is very well established. We know that it works even in very challenging physical environments. So it can certainly help from an access control perspective. But bear in mind that not all activities that take place underground are being performed within the scope of control of work. So if you have miners who are performing mining activities as opposed to maintenance activities down underground, they wouldn't necessarily have a permit or required to be authenticated by a tele-permit for those activities. And my understanding more broadly is that a lot of the challenge with illegal miners is that they're gaining entry to the underground workings through disused shafts and so on. So they're completely bypassing all of the systems and processes in the formal mining environment.
Sure, thank you.
But the ability, that same technology, the same types of fingerprint scanners and so on, we have used them across other industries as well to be able to identify people in the field, whether it's even in the agriculture space, for example, to be able to determine whether, when challenged, is this a legitimate employee of the operation, and the fingerprint scanners can be used in that sense to correctly identify a person. I think that one of the challenges that we've had in recent years with the biometric technologies, obviously with COVID, we have, you need to put protocols in place to make sure that the biometric scanners themselves don't become a vector for coronavirus or anything else contagious of that sort. But I do think that is all manageable with the correct protocols. So there's a well-established technology. It's widely used, and it certainly has its place, even if it won't resolve all issues that we do see.
Thank you. And then there was another question from Madeleine, which is, how can you access the system off-site?
Yes, so Madeleine, in short, the way that these networks are set up, it will allow correctly authenticated people to access the systems via a VPN while they are off-site. So, for example, with a good example of this are our customers in Canada, where they're able to do a lot of the preparatory work around their permits while they are still off-site using an iPad, basically from home. But they are correctly authenticated, and we manage the cybersecurity risks of that with the VPNs. But yes, they can access the system either by using mobile devices or PC or laptop. It's just that we need to make sure that there's a secure channel of communication at all times.
Thank you for that. We have 4 minutes left. If there are no further questions, are there any other questions before we wrap up? Nothing else. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. This is a really important conversation that needs to be had regularly. I'm very grateful for all of you for making the time, and Scott also for your contribution and time and effort despite being ill, and you battled through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Most welcome.